Do you really think anyone would notice? Lila Harper whispered, her fingers clutching the handle of the designer tote as she followed Ethan Caldwell briskly through the bustling terminal. The airport was alive with rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, and the subtle hum of wheels on polished tile, but Lila felt as though the entire world was focused solely on them. Ethan, tall and composed in his tailor navy suit, moved with a calm precision that contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. His hand briefly brushed against hers, an almost imperceptible signal to stay close. Yet his eyes scanned the crowd, calculating, alert, measuring who might be watching. The sunlight from the expansive glass walls streamed across the concourse, casting a golden glow on the luxury luggage stacked neatly beside them and the polished leather of Ethan's briefcase, highlighting every detail of affluence in stark contrast to the anxious flutter in Lila's chest. Passengers turned their heads, curiosity mingling with admiration and thinly veiled judgment, whispers cutting through the terminal like faint wind. Who's she with? The man's a big shot, right? Lila felt her cheeks heat under the scrutiny, her posture stiffening as she struggled to keep a neutral expression. Her heels clicked against the tile in a rhythm that echoed her racing heartbeat. Ethan's presence was commanding. Even when silent, it drew attention and subtly controlled the movements of everyone nearby. As they approached the check-in counter, a family with children paused mid-step to glance at Ethan, their eyes widening at the authoritative calm he radiated. Lila tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself she had rehearsed every step, every polite smile, every controlled nod, but the tension in the air pressed down on her chest like a heavy coat she could not remove. Ethan's voice broke her thoughts, low and measured. "Keep your focus," he murmured, and she obeyed instinctively. The escalators leading up to the departure gates reflected rows of passengers carrying bright carry-ons and oversized backpacks, some jostling, some absorbed in conversation, none of them aware of the silent rules Ethan was enforcing with a mere glance. Lila adjusted the strap of her tote, her fingers grazing the smooth leather, and for a moment allowed herself to imagine the freedom of simply disappearing into the crowd, escaping the tension. Yet Ethan's steady shadow beside her reminded her there was no escaping attention. A sharp announcement for a departing flight echoed above them, mingling with the soft, mechanical hum of the moving walkways, and she realized that every glance from a bystander carried a subtle judgment, a silent measure of her worth, as though the world had already decided she was someone to be scrutinized. Ethan paused briefly, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder in a gesture that was protective yet authoritative, signaling her forward without a word. The tactile sensation of his presence grounded her in the swirl of movement around them. She felt a shiver, not from cold but from anticipation, and the metallic gleam of the trolley wheels underfoot added a subtle percussion to the tension mounting with every step. As they neared the security checkpoint, an older man's eyes lingered on Lila with a mixture of curiosity and mild disdain, whispering something inaudible to his companion. Lila's pulse quickened, her stomach tightening, yet Ethan's eyes never wavered, his gaze sharp, calculating, silently commanding respect from the surrounding crowd. She swallowed hard, forcing a smile that felt fragile against the weight of scrutiny, while Ethan efficiently carried her bag, the effortless act magnifying both the attention they attracted and the silent hierarchy unfolding around them. Every step, every glance, every subtle movement was a test of composure and courage, and Lila could feel the invisible threads of observation tightening around her, knowing that the moment of revelation, the appearance of someone unexpected, could arrive at any second and change everything. The automatic sliding doors whooshed behind them as Ethan guided Lila toward the gate, the scent of polished floors and faint perfume lingering in the air. Lila kept her gaze low, fingers gripping the strap of the tote that Ethan had insisted he carry, a small gesture that somehow felt both protective and demeaning. The overhead monitors flashed departure times in bold letters, casting a pale blue glow over the crowd, yet every movement of the passengers around them seemed amplified in Lila's awareness. She could feel the eyes of a businessman in a gray suit lingering for a moment too long, a mother tugging her child closer with a whispered warning, the subtle judgment of strangers slicing through the ambient hum of rolling suitcases and muted conversations. Ethan moved beside her with calm efficiency, his polished shoes clicking against the tile in a rhythm that contrasted with Lila's uneven heartbeat. He adjusted his grip on her bag without breaking stride, his eyes scanning the terminal with a precision that suggested both awareness and authority, measuring who might pose a complication, who might notice more than they should. Lila took a shallow breath. The air scented faintly with coffee from the nearby cafe and the metallic tang of the baggage carousel, and she forced her posture straight, reminding herself that composure was the only shield she had in this environment. Every turn of her head revealed a new pair of eyes appraising, whispering, evaluating, and she could feel the weight of their speculation pressing against her chest. Ethan paused briefly by a seating area, giving her a subtle nod, a silent instruction to continue, and she followed, adjusting the strap of her bag and keeping her expression neutral. The escalators reflected streaks of sunlight from the terminal windows, and the moving walkways hummed beneath the feet of the hurrying passengers, all of whom seemed unaware of the silent tension she felt vibrating through her body. Lila's shoes echoed faintly in the concourse, a staccato accompaniment to the soft murmurs of the crowd and the occasional click of a camera shutter from a passenger, snapping a photo of the busy terminal. She reminded herself that the carefully rehearsed smiles and measured nods were more than etiquette. They were survival, and the unspoken rules Ethan enforced with a mere glance were as real as the polished steel rails guiding them toward the gate. As they approached the checkpoint, a line of travelers with small children and overstuffed carry-ons paused, their conversations dropping to a near whisper as they assessed the pair moving with quiet authority through the throng. Lila felt her chest tighten with each step, her grip on the tote tightening almost instinctively, and Ethan's presence remained a steadying force beside her, the subtle brush of his shoulder against hers reinforcing the unspoken trust that had been established. The sun's rays cast long reflections on the tile, illuminating the contrasting textures of Lila's delicate outfit and the sleek, commanding lines of Ethan's suit, a visual representation of their disparate positions in the hierarchy of the terminal. She could feel the collective curiosity of the crowd pressing in from all sides, a tangible pressure that made her acutely aware of the distance she maintained from Ethan while still remaining tethered to his silent guidance. Every step toward the gate was measured, deliberate, yet filled with the unspoken tension of anticipation, the sense that at any moment the scene could shift and bring unexpected attention or intervention. The polished floors echoed faintly with the rhythm of their steps, and Lila could not escape the awareness of the subtle judgments, the fleeting glances, the quick assessments made by those who did not know the full story, and she forced herself to breathe evenly, keeping her composure as the crowd parted just enough for them to move through without obstruction. Ethan's quiet command of space, creating an invisible buffer around her, and his calculated calm, offering a fragile reassurance in the midst of the airport's constant motion. As Ethan and Lila approached the security checkpoint, the hum of scanners and the shuffling of feet created a rhythm that seemed almost synchronized with Lila's racing heartbeat. She followed Ethan closely, aware of the subtle attention their presence drew from uniformed agents and fellow passengers, each glance weighing her with curiosity and quiet judgment. Lila's fingers tightened on the strap of her tote, the smooth leather a small anchor against the tension that seemed to thrum through the terminal. Ethan's movements were calm, deliberate, a controlled rhythm that contrasted sharply with her own uneasy energy, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings with a precision that left no detail unnoticed. The overhead lights reflected off polished metal and glass, casting a warm glow that highlighted the contrast between the bustling terminal and the composed pair moving with silent purpose. Lila forced herself to breathe evenly, each inhalation steadying her against the rising tide of apprehension. Yet she could feel the pull of anxious eyes on her, the subtle shifts of passengers as they whispered and turned to observe. Ethan's hand brushed lightly against hers, a fleeting touch that was both reassuring and commanding, a reminder that the space they occupied was subtly under his control. The rolling baggage carts and automated trolleys moved past, their soft clattering blending with the low murmur of distant announcements, creating a soundscape that made every step feel amplified, every motion under scrutiny. Lila's shoes clicked softly against the tile, punctuating the quiet tension that seemed to fill the terminal, as she forced herself to focus on the rhythm of her steps, matching them to Ethan's, drawing a fragile strength from the precision of his movements. As they waited in line for the scanners, an older traveler cast a fleeting, curious glance at them, and Lila felt a twinge of self-consciousness, the awareness of her status and position heightened by the unspoken evaluation in every gaze. Ethan adjusted the grip on the tote with a fluid motion, a small but deliberate act that reinforced his silent guidance, and Lila followed, instinctively keeping pace, her own movements careful and deliberate, attuned to the unspoken rules Ethan imposed with his presence alone. The scent of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe mingled with the faint metallic aroma of the security equipment, grounding her in the sensory details even as the pressure of observation pressed inward, making each step feel weighty and significant. Ethan's posture was impeccable, the navy fabric of his suit reflecting the light in sharp lines, a visual contrast to Lila's lighter, flowing attire, and each subtle movement of his head or hand seemed to redirect the attention of those around them, creating a protective bubble that she was both conscious of and dependent upon. Her pulse thrummed in rhythm with the movement of the crowd, her awareness of every whisper, every sideways glance heightened to a near physical sensation, and she adjusted the tote strap again, the weight of it a small reminder of the care she had to take in maintaining composure. Ethan's steady pace, the deliberate cadence of his footsteps, the measured way he led her through the checkpoint all contributed to a sense of order amid the chaos, a silent assurance that despite the scrutiny, they were moving with purpose and control. The distant sound of flight announcements mixed with the low mechanical hum of conveyor belts and escalators, forming a backdrop to the careful choreography of their passage, and Lila forced herself to focus on each movement, each instruction, each subtle signal from Ethan, trusting in the rhythm and guidance that allowed her to navigate the intense scrutiny with as much dignity as she could muster. Every detail of the terminal, from the polished floors to the gleaming handrails, seemed magnified in her perception, every person around them a potential observer or judge, and she kept her expression neutral, her breathing controlled, each step a deliberate act of composure and self-preservation, guided by the quiet authority of Ethan Caldwell at her side. Boarding passes stretched ahead, a blur of neutral tones and hurried movement. Yet Lila felt as though every eye was tracking her and Ethan with heightened scrutiny. The soft hum of automated scanners and the distant echo of trolley wheels created a constant rhythm, underscoring the tension that seemed to coil around her chest. Ethan moved steadily, his posture impeccable, shoulders squared, a calm authority radiating with each deliberate step, and the slight adjustments he made to the tote's weight were fluid, unspoken cues of his control over the environment. Lila adjusted her own stance to match his rhythm, her palms lightly brushing the smooth leather of the bag, feeling the contrast of her nervous energy against his composed presence. The fluorescent lights above reflected faintly off polished tile, catching the edges of the carry-ons and rolling suitcases like tiny beacons of attention, and she could sense the subtle shift of focus from the travelers around them, whispers floating through the air like fragile threads of curiosity. Each step brought a heightened awareness of proximity, of spacing, of the way Ethan subtly guided them, ensuring their path remained clear even as the throng ebbed and flowed around them. Lila's heartbeat quickened as a young mother glanced over with thinly veiled suspicion, her children tugging at her coat, yet Ethan's gaze moved effortlessly across the terminal, a silent perimeter of observation that both shielded and imposed. The scent of coffee and warm pastries from the nearby cafe mingled with the faint metallic undertone of the scanners, grounding her senses, giving a rhythm to focus on even as her internal tension ebbed and surged with every passerby's glance. Ethan's voice, low and unobtrusive, broke through her swirling thoughts, a calm anchor. "Keep moving steadily," he instructed, and she adjusted her stride, letting the flow of his measured pace settle the anxious tremor in her legs. The polished metal of the conveyor belts reflected the overhead lights, catching glimpses of her reflection, reminding her of the scrutiny that surrounded them, the invisible pressure of judgment that weighed heavier than any tangible obstacle. Lila's gaze flicked momentarily to the wide windows lining the terminal, the sun streaming in, catching dust motes suspended in the air like tiny sparks. And for a heartbeat, she felt suspended between urgency and self-consciousness, the world compressing around the controlled movements of her escort. Ethan paused at a subtle widening of the line, shifting the bag with a smooth motion, creating a buffer without a word, and Lila instinctively fell in step, attuned to the unspoken choreography of his guidance. The soft thrum of announcements and distant rolling luggage punctuated their movement, each sound a reminder of the constant motion, of the world spinning around them while they navigated its microcosm of scrutiny. Lila's posture remained straight, her steps synchronized with Ethan's, a delicate dance of observation and authority that allowed them to progress without incident. Yet every subtle glance from those around them felt like an examination of character, of status, of composure under invisible pressure. The ambient warmth of sunlight and the faint hum of electronic devices created a sensory cocoon, focusing her awareness on the immediate path, the deliberate cadence of Ethan's steps, and the protective authority that radiated from his presence, allowing her to move through the crowd with a cautious sense of security. Each motion, each calculated step, each adjustment of her tote reinforced a rhythm, a measured composure that countered the weight of scrutiny, and Lila remained intensely aware that the narrative unfolding around them was dictated not just by movement, but by the subtle, commanding presence of Ethan Caldwell at her side. As they reached the security scanners, the terminal seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, a maze of polished floors, chrome rails, and the steady hum of automatic doors opening and closing. Lila Harper's grip on her tote tightened instinctively as Ethan Caldwell moved with his usual composed precision, a subtle rhythm guiding them through the stream of travelers. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the faint metallic undertone of the scanners, grounding her senses even as the weight of observation pressed against her chest. Passengers shifted around them, some curious, some distracted, yet each movement felt magnified in Lila's awareness, every glance carrying a silent judgment she could not ignore. Ethan's presence beside her was a constant anchor, the calculated way he adjusted the strap of the tote and shifted his own briefcase, drawing attention in a controlled manner, a quiet statement of authority that reassured her even as it made the scrutiny of onlookers sharper. Lila forced herself to maintain a straight posture, each step measured, the click of her heels echoing against the tile, blending with the soft rhythm of rolling suitcases and distant announcements. She felt the subtle tension in the air, a mixture of curiosity and respect from those around, and she could sense the unspoken recognition that the man at her side commanded attention without a word. Ethan's eyes moved steadily, scanning the space ahead, anticipating any disruption, the slight turn of his head a cue for her to match his pace, to adjust her own movements with quiet precision. The sun streaming through the expansive glass walls cast golden highlights across the crowd, glinting off the polished leather of Ethan's briefcase and the metal zippers of her tote, emphasizing the visual contrast between their composed authority and the chaotic energy of the surrounding terminal. Lila inhaled slowly, focusing on the tactile sensation of her hands against the smooth leather, each breath a reminder to stay present, to maintain the rhythm Ethan had set, the careful choreography of their passage through the terminal a delicate balance of attention and composure. The hum of the moving walkways beneath their feet added a subtle pulse to the scene, and Lila adjusted her footing to synchronize with Ethan's, each measured step reinforcing the control he exercised over the environment. An elderly traveler glanced their way, curiosity flickering in his eyes, and Lila felt the familiar pang of self-consciousness. But Ethan's subtle nod guided her forward, an unspoken shield against the scrutiny of strangers. The terminal's overhead lights reflected off polished surfaces, catching glimpses of movement and creating fleeting patterns of light that seemed to frame them in a bubble of focused attention. Lila's thoughts swirled briefly, caught between the anxiety of exposure and the reassurance of Ethan's steady presence, and she allowed herself a moment to observe the way his hand lightly touched the strap of the tote, a gesture both protective and commanding. The rhythmic sounds of announcements, the soft clatter of trolley wheels, and the shuffle of hurried passengers created a backdrop for their careful navigation, and Lila remained acutely aware of each micro-movement, each subtle shift in the crowd, letting Ethan's calm authority dictate the flow. As they moved past the last of the travelers waiting for screening, Lila felt a mixture of relief and continued tension. The controlled passage through the terminal a testament to the careful choreography Ethan maintained, the quiet authority that guided them without force, and the shared understanding that composure, attention, and presence could command the space around them. Even in the midst of constant motion, just as Ethan and Lila reached the glass doors leading to the departure gates, a sudden shift in the atmosphere caught Lila off guard, a subtle movement at the far end of the terminal drawing her eyes instinctively. The warm sunlight, streaming through the high windows, caught a gleam of movement, and Lila felt the familiar tightening of her chest, the pulse of anticipation that had accompanied every step through the terminal building like a persistent drumbeat. Ethan slowed slightly, his hand adjusting the tote with careful precision, his eyes narrowing just enough to track the source without disrupting their forward motion. The distant murmur of travelers became a muted backdrop, as if the world had momentarily compressed around this new focus, and Lila sensed the weight of observation sharpening in an almost tangible way. A hush seemed to ripple through the cluster of passengers ahead, a sudden stillness that contrasted with the constant hum of rolling luggage and soft chatter, and Lila instinctively lowered her gaze while her mind raced to piece together what had caused the subtle disruption. Ethan's posture remained commanding, shoulders squared, eyes steady and calculating, yet his hand on the tote communicated a quiet reassurance that both grounded her and reminded her of the delicate balance they maintained in navigating the crowd. Lila's fingers brushed over the leather strap, each touch a small anchor against the tension that thrummed through her body, and she allowed herself to follow Ethan's lead, matching his steps with careful precision, each movement deliberate and controlled. The reflective surfaces of the terminal gleamed under the sunlight, catching on the metal of briefcases and the polished shoes of travelers, highlighting the contrast between the fluid authority of Ethan's movements and the tentative caution in Lila's own. A soft announcement for a delayed flight echoed in the background, blending with the rhythmic hum of the moving walkways, the combined soundscape grounding Lila even as her attention remained acutely attuned to every motion ahead. Ethan subtly shifted the tote, drawing the weight closer to his side, and Lila felt the subtle reinforcement of security and guidance, the invisible boundaries of control he imposed without a word, creating space between them and the watchful eyes of strangers. The polished floors reflected the sunlight in a pattern that seemed almost orchestrated, guiding them through the flow of the crowd, and Lila followed with heightened awareness, noting the way passengers adjusted around them, a subtle choreography of recognition and caution. Her pulse continued to match the rhythm of the terminal, the movement of her heels and soft clicks blending with the faint vibrations from the conveyor belts beneath, a steadying cadence that mirrored the deliberate pace Ethan maintained. A family paused to adjust the stroller of a small child, their glance briefly flicking toward Ethan and Lila, curiosity and subdued awe visible in the eyes of both parents and child, and Lila's chest tightened with a familiar mixture of self-consciousness and anticipation. Ethan's gaze swept the terminal once more, noting subtle shifts in posture and attention, a silent orchestration that allowed them to continue unimpeded, and Lila followed, attuned to every minute adjustment, every nuanced gesture, the careful negotiation of space and observation reinforcing the quiet authority he radiated. Each step, each breath, each glance became part of a meticulous rhythm, a sequence that allowed them to navigate the terminal with composed precision, the subtle tension between anticipation and control weaving through every interaction. And Lila felt the simultaneous weight and reassurance of Ethan Caldwell's presence guiding them forward through the crowded, sunlit space. As Ethan and Lila moved past the checkpoint, the spacious terminal ahead seemed to open like a stage, its polished floors reflecting the soft morning light streaming through the expansive windows. Lila felt a mixture of relief and lingering tension, her palms still lightly gripping the strap of her tote, while her eyes flicked over the crowd, noting the curious stares and whispered exchanges of travelers who sensed the quiet authority emanating from Ethan. The subtle scent of coffee from a nearby cafe mixed with the faint metallic aroma of the scanners, grounding her as she adjusted her posture to maintain a composed exterior. Ethan walked with deliberate precision, each step measured, his eyes scanning the terminal with calm calculation, noting every subtle shift in the crowd and the positioning of travelers around them, creating a silent buffer of space that allowed Lila to follow with confidence. The hum of the moving walkways and the faint clatter of rolling suitcases provided a steady rhythm, a backdrop to the unspoken choreography of their movement, and Lila synchronized her steps, her breathing controlled, matching the cadence set by Ethan's deliberate pace. Sunlight glinted off the polished metal, handrails and glossy floors, illuminating the differences in texture and tone between Ethan's tailored navy suit and Lila's softer, flowing outfit, highlighting the visual contrast of authority and caution as they moved forward. A family paused nearby, their children glancing curiously at the pair, and Lila felt the familiar prickle of self-consciousness. Yet Ethan's subtle nod guided her forward, an unspoken assurance that their path was clear and that composure could command attention without overt action. Each footstep, each glance, each careful adjustment of the tote reinforced a rhythm of control and awareness, allowing Lila to navigate the terminal with a delicate balance of caution and presence. The overhead monitors flickered with flight information, their bright numbers casting soft reflections on the polished surfaces around them, adding a visual layer to the constant flow of sound and motion that filled the space. Lila's heartbeat matched the rhythm of their movement, each pulse echoing the anticipation and vigilance required to maintain composure under the watchful eyes of strangers, and she remained acutely aware of the subtle judgments in each glance, letting Ethan's calm authority guide her actions. The ambient noises of announcements and distant trolley wheels merged into a soft background hum, a steady cadence against which Lila measured her own movements, adjusting her steps, her posture, her expression, to reflect the controlled composure that Ethan exemplified. Every detail, from the gleam of polished floors to the reflections of sunlight on luggage handles, served as a reminder of the careful orchestration required to navigate the crowded space without disruption, and Lila followed closely, attuned to every nuance of Ethan's movements, every subtle shift in his gaze, trusting the unspoken communication that had developed between them. As they approached the gate, Lila could feel the anticipation building, the sense that the next moment might bring an unexpected change in the environment, yet the careful rhythm and measured steps set by Ethan provided a steadying presence, allowing her to move forward with confidence and awareness. The silent authority at her side guiding her through the bustling, sunlit terminal with precision and control. As Ethan and Lila stepped through the sliding glass doors into the bright expanse of the departure gate, a subtle ripple of awareness ran through the terminal, a shift in attention that Lila felt immediately. Travelers paused mid-stride, some turning to glance at the pair, their curiosity mingled with a muted sense of recognition for the composed presence Ethan projected. The sunlight poured through the large windows, casting long, golden reflections across the polished tile and glinting off the metal handles of the rolling luggage scattered around, creating a visual contrast that heightened the tension Lila felt coiling in her chest. She kept her fingers lightly resting on the strap of the tote, its smooth leather a grounding presence as she tried to steady her breathing and maintain the composed posture Ethan had taught her to adopt with each step. Ethan walked beside her with deliberate calm, each movement precise and measured, his gaze sweeping over the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in posture and the flickers of attention in the eyes of nearby passengers. The distant hum of announcements and the low murmur of the crowd blended into a rhythmic backdrop, a steady pulse that seemed to synchronize with the deliberate cadence of their movement, and Lila adjusted her steps to match, each click of her heels a quiet accompaniment to the composed rhythm he set. The scent of coffee from a nearby cafe mingled with the metallic undertones of the security scanners, creating a sensory environment that anchored her even as the anticipation in the terminal built like a quiet wave pressing against her chest. Ethan's hand brushed the tote briefly, a small, precise gesture of control and reassurance, and Lila instinctively matched her pace to his, each step deliberate, each breath measured, internalizing the unspoken coordination that allowed them to navigate the crowded space with composure. Travelers moved past, some speaking in hushed tones, some pausing just long enough to catch a glimpse of the pair, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and quiet respect, and Lila felt the familiar tension of observation pressing inward while Ethan's calm presence acted as a protective buffer. The polished floors reflected the sunlight in shifting patterns, catching the edge of every movement and accentuating the contrast between the flowing lines of Lila's attire and the structured authority of Ethan's suit. She could feel the rhythm of their movement echoing subtly through the terminal, the soft clicks of shoes and the hum of machinery, forming a pattern that guided her steps, reinforcing the composure and awareness required to maintain control over their shared space. Ethan's gaze swept the terminal with quiet precision, noting the direction and attention of nearby travelers, his subtle adjustments of the tote and the way he shifted his body, ensuring a continuous flow of controlled presence, allowing Lila to remain focused on her own movements, her own breathing, and the careful synchronization that had become second nature in his company. Each micro-movement, each subtle glance, and each controlled adjustment reinforced the pattern of authority and composure, the careful orchestration of space around them, and Lila felt the simultaneous weight and reassurance of moving through the terminal under Ethan's unspoken guidance. The sunlight played across the high windows, reflecting off luggage and polished floors, creating a visual rhythm that complemented the measured cadence of their steps, and Lila remained intensely aware of every detail, every movement, every glance, trusting in Ethan's steady presence to guide them through the bustling, sunlit terminal without misstep. The quiet authority radiating from his every gesture, creating an invisible shield that allowed her to move with both awareness and confidence. The moment they reached the expansive waiting area near the departure gate, the flow of travelers seemed to shift subtly, an almost imperceptible change that made Lila Harper pause for a fraction of a second. Sunlight poured through the massive windows, illuminating the polished tile and highlighting the organized chaos of rolling luggage and brisk footsteps. Yet amidst the crowd, a quiet attention seemed to settle around Ethan Caldwell and the tote he carried with such controlled precision. Lila felt the familiar tightening of her chest, the pulse of anticipation. Yet the steady rhythm of Ethan's steps beside her provided a grounding anchor, his calm presence radiating authority that subtly influenced the awareness of those around them. She adjusted the tote strap instinctively, feeling the smooth leather beneath her fingers, a reassuring constant as the murmurs and whispers of nearby travelers brushed past her consciousness like a soft current. Ethan's eyes scanned the terminal methodically, noting shifts in posture, quick glances, the slight adjustments passengers made as if sensing the unspoken order he imposed, creating a corridor of subtle control that allowed Lila to navigate without disruption. The soft hum of the moving walkways beneath them blended with the distant announcements, creating a gentle rhythm that matched the cadence of their synchronized movement, each step deliberate and measured, a silent choreography of precision and composure. Lila's heels clicked lightly against the tile, a staccato counterpoint to the ambient sound of trolleys and luggage wheels. Each click grounding her in the present, reinforcing the careful awareness she maintained with every forward motion. The polished surfaces reflected the sunlight in shifting patterns, catching glimpses of Ethan's crisp navy suit, the subtle sheen of his leather briefcase, and the delicate flow of her own attire, emphasizing the visual contrast of authority and careful caution. She felt the familiar tension of observation, the pressure of imagined scrutiny, yet Ethan's slight adjustment of the tote and the gentle, almost imperceptible touch of his hand on her shoulder reminded her that she was moving within a carefully constructed perimeter of safety and control. Passengers shifted and moved around them, some pausing to glance, others continuing their pace. Yet the subtle authority Ethan projected seemed to guide the flow, creating a buffer of awareness that protected Lila from intrusive observation. The scent of coffee and pastries from the nearby cafe mixed with the faint metallic aroma of the scanners, providing a sensory anchor as she moved, focusing on each detail, each subtle shift, each micro-movement in the surrounding crowd. Ethan's steady pace, the measured cadence of his movements, the deliberate care with which he maintained space around them all created a rhythm that Lila matched instinctively, each breath and step aligned with his, reinforcing a sense of composure and quiet confidence in the midst of the busy, sunlit terminal. The reflections of sunlight on the polished tile and luggage handles created a shifting mosaic of light that drew Lila's attention upward for just a moment, a pause that allowed her to sense the depth of control Ethan exerted without speaking, and she realized that in that brief, suspended instant, every movement, every glance, every subtle adjustment had carried them safely to the edge of the boarding area. The invisible threads of awareness and authority woven around them, maintaining an unbroken rhythm that guided them forward through the bustling terminal with confidence, composure, and quiet assurance.